reaction that you receive when you casually mention to an American that your favorite food is chicken fries? It's a look of horror mixed with a flash of, "Are you from Mars?" And when I say, "No, just Brazil," they're even more confused. "Oh, but you speak English so well." "Yeah, well, I have American parents." "Oh, so you're not really Brazilian, right?" It's a conversation I've had repeatedly throughout my life, and one that's often left me with a sense that, in the eyes of others, I don't truly belong anywhere. That I can't rightfully claim the culture that I grew up in my entire life, or the culture of my family. For most of modern American history, the answer to the question, "Where are you from?" has been simple. There may have been one or two places where you had a history, but for the most part, people felt a general sense of belonging to the places they had lived and the people they grew up with. Today, as our society becomes increasingly more globalized, the answer to this question becomes more and more daunting. To ask "where are you from" implies much more than a geographic location, and asks more about the psychological journey of a person and the places that have molded them along the way. For me, the answer to this question has never been simple. When I was 6 months old, my parents moved to Belo Horizonte, Brazil. I carry an American passport, though I have a permanent Brazilian residency visa. In my childhood, trips to the States were restricted to short family vacations and trips to the store to stock up on inexpensive clothes and peanut butter. I was always destined to be the American in Brazil and the Brazilian in America. When I was 14 years old, I stumbled across the term third culture kid, and for the first time in my life, feelings I had experienced for years had finally been given a name. The real definition of a third culture kid is an individual who spent a significant amount of their developmental years in a culture outside that of their parents. What this results in is the parent's culture and the culture the child grows up in blend to form an entirely new, entirely unique third culture that is unlike either of the original. What this leads to is a person that belongs to neither culture exclusively. So how is this similar to what's happening more and more in our globalized society? Today, we are all products of a globalized generation. Though your primary influence may be Western culture, an increasingly globalized society focused on the diversity of the world still makes its mark on your cultural influences in ways that you might not even realize. In fact, particularly in the United States, with increasing influences due to immigration and minorities, a more and more diverse society is emerging day by day. In fact, by 2060, the Census Bureau has predicted that non-Hispanic whites will no longer be the majority in our country. So what does this mean for us? How do we navigate belonging and identity in a world that is constantly changing? In order to do this, we must first understand that this lack of belonging leads to a loneliness that is not unique to just third culture kids. Loneliness is an epidemic within our modern society. A product of our unconstant and unpredictable world, loneliness is inevitably something we are all dealing with on a day-to-day basis. It hides in ways we might not even realize. According to research conducted by Dr. Holt Loonstadt, a psychology professor at Brigham Young University and a leading researcher in the field of loneliness, loneliness has a higher risk associated with it than obesity and increases your risk of mortality by 50% compared to those with stronger social support. Loneliness has the equivalent risk of smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day. A sense of belonging, according to Dr. Kenneth Pelletier at the Stanford Center for Research and Disease Prevention, appears to be a basic human need, as basic as food or shelter. In fact, social support may be one of the critical elements distinguishing those who remain healthy from those who become ill. The only way to navigate belonging in a world that is constantly changing is to understand yourself in such a way that you're able to belong anywhere. Maya Angelou once said, "You are only free when you realize that you belong no place." You belong every place, no place at all. The price is high, the reward is great. To understand this, we must first understand that the idea of identity and belonging must be adaptable and moldable. The only way to truly belong wherever we are, everywhere and nowhere, is to have your sense of belonging tied to a deep understanding of self, rather than the always changing and fluctuating feelings of being known and understood by others. No one can know you more deeply than yourself. If you surrender your sense of belonging to the hands of others, their always changing, fluctuating, and unpredictable feelings will disappoint every time. The same is true for geographic places and political parties. Living in a world of constant mobility, fluctuation, and change are inevitable. You may often return to your hometown to find that the places you once knew, beautiful pastures filled with horses, trees, or even your old high school, have now moved on and been replaced by apartment complexes, the newest drugstore, or even a McDonald's. Looking back on my life, it was easy for me to feel the effects of loneliness. I exist between cultures, or perhaps more correctly, I am of a third culture, not completely of my culture of birth and not completely of the culture in which I grew up. But learning more about third culture has formed a sense of my own identity, allowing me to see that I am a product of and belong to more than one place, and that that's okay. I desire this sense of identity for everyone. Looking back on my life, my life was defined by the effects of inconsistency and inconstancy due to constant adaptability and change. But what this taught me was that in order to truly belong, I could not cling to things that change. I had to change alongside the inconsistency of my life. As friends moved away, I learned to keep in touch and make new friends. And as I had to move, I learned to fight the voice inside my head that told me that I didn't belong anywhere, and to tell it that I would be just fine, because I belong everywhere and nowhere. Our world is so big and diverse. In order to combat loneliness and isolation and all the feelings that target belonging and identity, we can no longer choose to identify ourselves by the place on which we stand. We must choose to self-identify as citizens of the world. And this is not to say that patriotism, pride, and nationalism are not important. These are incredibly important distinctives of our culture that give us a sense of pride and ownership over where we live and were raised. But relying on only these distinctives for our sense of belonging can be detrimental to our sense of belonging. If all we have to rely on is one type of person in one type of place, what happens when the places we once knew no longer exist? And when the people we relied on for that feeling of belonging move on and change? So I'd like to propose 3 ways to embrace living in a modern society. Number 1, travel. As much as you can, as far as you can, whether it's across the ocean, across town, or just into your neighbor's backyard. Get to know spaces and places where you feel uncomfortable, and willingly attach your heart to things that you never thought possible. And I promise you that as you give pieces of your heart away to different places on earth, you will get it back 10 times fold. Number 2, eat the chicken hearts. To know a people, you must eat their food. Anthony Bourdain once said, "If I'm an advocate for anything, it's to move. As much as you can, as far as you can, whether it's across the ocean or just across the river, to put yourself into someone else's shoes, or at least just eat their food." Number 3, inquire. Read, ask questions. Begin to understand more of who others are and what makes them who they are. Their cultural identity and what makes them unique and individualistic. And as you do that, as you begin to understand more of what makes others who they are, you will begin to understand more of what makes you who you are. And as we do that, we will begin to build roots among us and connections. And those roots will ultimately give rise to branches of social support that will carry us away from loneliness and isolation and towards belonging more and more to ourselves and those who matter most to us and care for us most. These three things are not going to change the world, and they're not going to solve any of the conflicts that we have in our world today. But these three things, I promise you, they will change you. And that is the first step towards helping ourselves and others belong wherever we are. Thank you.